welcome everyone. A big NeuroSemantics welcome to each and every one of you. All 47 of you. I think a lot of people are still coming in. A special welcome to you, Michael, our founder and leader, and to our First Lady, Geraldine. I really always love seeing you together and the smiles that you have on each other's faces at this time. So thank you so much. A special welcome to you and the Bali people who are hosting us today, Mariani and the team over there. My name is Pobati, for those who don't know me, and I chair the South African Institute of NeuroSemantics. And in that capacity, I also serve on the global leadership team of ISNS. This is a NeuroSemantics wisdom session. We have this session every second month. There's something going on. It keeps going echoing. We have this session every second month. It alternates with another online session where we focus on the application of the learning that we're going to get today, and learn and experience that learning together. So you are here today. Be sure to come back for the application of what we are going to be learning today. So wisdom sessions are about deepening our knowledge and experience so that we can continue to be at the top of our game and make an impact in our world. The Africans have a beautiful proverb that I love so much about knowledge. It says that knowledge is like a garden. If it is not cultivated, it cannot be harvested, right? So we are here as an African, I'm quite familiar with the concept of sitting around a fire and learning from our elders and from each other. And so these sessions really always remind me of that, that it's that time. So I know from earlier conversation that some of you are attending this session for the first time. I know some South Africans who are coming here for the first time and some Mauritians. And I know that some of you are regular. So whether you're a regular or a newbie, you are welcome. We have 90 minutes. To deepen this knowledge and cultivate the knowledge. 70 of those are dedicated to learning from our founder, Michael, and then taking questions from that. So before we go into that, let's greet each other, right? We want to greet each other, welcome each other. So I'm going to share slides that rep from each institute. And when your slide is shown, the invitation is just greet us in the way in which you greet each other in your country so that we can actually learn how to greet each other in our own languages, right? So as I play that, as I show the video, I'm going to do it now. It's not a video, by the way. It's a slide. I'm going to share it now. And just greet, unmute your mic, and then greet. Okay, so I'm gonna do am I sharing? Yes, I am. Here's the first one. Egypt and Middle East. Greet us, guys.
Welcome.
How do you greet in your country from Egypt?
Just clap our hands. Hey.
Oh, okay, okay. All right, I would have thought it would be like salam alaikum or alaikum salam, something like that. Yeah, but thank you for that. Next is the Institute of Brazil. How do we greet in Brazil?
Olá, bem-vindos.
Oh, wow.
Olá, bem-vindos. Wow, olá, bem-vindos. So there's gonna be a test soon, because as we get to know how we greet each other in each institute, now in the future we'll be testing. Somebody else will be greeting you in Brazilian. I know that's not the right language, the right word, but anyway, thank you. Next one, Institute of NeuroSemantics in South Africa, in Africa. How do we greet?
Aduh, me, saubon,
Kimanye, Kimanye.
Aha. Oh, yeah. See the variety. Dumelang, how's it? All kinds of things. Welcome. Welcome to that institute. And Bruno, I think your institute used to be here. How do we greet from Mauritius?
Say Kimanye.
Wow.
Kimanye.
Kimanye. Wow. That's Kimanye is very different. Wow. I thought it would be like
Kimanye is like,
bonjour
how
or
are
something.
you? How's it going?
Oh, nice. Kimanye. Okay, thank you. Next one, the Institute of NeuroSemantics, Philippines. How do we greet in Philippines? The Filipinos, First Lady, you are on mute.
That's how we greet each other.
What? You go
So
like
we
this.
say mabuhay.
Mabuhay.
Mabuhay. Okay, mabuhay from the Philippines. Thank you. And then, ooh, the USA. How do we greet in America?
What's up, man?
You forgot.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what's up? What's up? Okay. All right, that's the Americans greeting us. Thank you. Yes, somebody's mic needs to be on mute. Ah, there's a big echo coming from Michael's side.
Okay,
Aha,
sorry.
Australia, from down under.
Yeah.
How do we greet there? How do we greet in Australia? Greet us. Ah, there are no Australians.
Hi,
in the
morning, mate.
room.
It's already morning here. Good morning, mate. Australia.
Oh,
woo!
good morning. Oh, yes. Welcome, welcome, Australians. Thank you for saying hi to us. And Europe, how do we say hello in Europe?
We say hello.
Any Europeans in the room? You just say hello. You just say hello, hello, welcome, welcome, Europeans. Malaysia, how do you greet?
Selamat datang. Selamat
Selamat
datang.
datang. Ooh, okay. And how do we respond to that? Anyway, you'll have to learn that again. Next time we're learning until we all know how to greet each other in our own unique languages. All right, and then what's the next one? Scandinavia.
Whoa, yes.
Hey!
God dag, alle sammen.
That's how you greet.
Yay.
Okay.
Tjenare.
Okay. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you so much. Hong Kong and China. How do you greet?
你好，你好，你好吗？
Ni hao, ni hao ma.
你好。
Oh, okay. Welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Indonesia.
Indonesia.
Wow.
Indonesia.
Horas, horas.
Horas, horas.
All right. Is that how you greet? What do you say, horas? Is horas how you greet?
Horas Pono Sumatera. Indonesia.
Ah, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Ooh, do you see how large we are? How many institutes? We are really international. The next one, LATAM, Institute of NeuroSemantics, LATAM.
Hola.
Hola.
Hola todos. Bienvenidos. Hola. Okay, okay. And then, oh, what's the next one? Oh, that's it. We are done. Welcome, guys. You know, so welcome. Be in the room. As we get started to get to Michael, we did say that we have 90 minutes. 70, we've already started it. 70 is dedicated to learning from Michael. Please keep your video on But while you do that, so keep your video on so that our brains can connect and we can connect with each other. But please put your mic on mute so that this, the
Time plus.
interference as we work. This session is for you, your own plan so that you can be able to harvest your knowledge. So on the chat, if you have a question, write a big capital Q next to it, the question, as succinct as you can, so that we are able to go back. I'll be reading the questions as we go along and posting them to Michael as the session goes on. Okay, are we all ready to go? Michael, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
We can hear you. So turning to you, Mike. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Turning to you, Michael, oh, by the way, I'm gonna share the slides. Let me share your slides before I go anywhere. Today, Michael, is about what you're gonna be sharing with us. Let me put it up there. Is so essentially one of what you're presenting to us, which we all know as neurosemantics, but you are neuroscientists, but you're taking it to a whole new level, is that there is a place up there where we all live from, and even though we've been learning about it, obviously as neuroscientists, you have new knowledge for us. And particularly what I picked up from what you're going to share with us today is, what is the architecture of that place up and above, higher over there? What is architecture? And what are the keys of, opening it up and thinking about it in a way that enables us to live our resourceful lives, right, Michael? That's what you are going to be sharing with us today, correct?
Correct.
Yes. All right, so I go to the next slide. You can tell me, I'll be doing the slides for you. When you are ready, I'll just be working through and posting the questions to you as they come.
Okay. So as you can see, the title is The Meta Place. For 45 years in the field of NLP, we have been going meta. But where have we been going? What's there, and where is this place? And so this is a presentation on a new development that extends the matrix model much, much further, the meta place. So the next slide. So you and I live in two worlds. We live in the internal world of our mind. We live in the external world where we encounter external reality. And so the question there is, what's inside this internal world? We know there's stuff in there, but what's the landscape? And how can I picture the landscape of the mind? And so that's what we're going to be seeking to answer and providing a template for how to think about it. So the last question there is, how can we see this world, and how can we see how the things inside this inner world are related? Next slide. So the meta place is above and beyond what you see and hear and feel. What you see and hear and feel, the VAK, is the representational screen in our mind, and it's how we think. It's how every child thinks, by making pictures and sounds and sensations of whatever they encounter. It begins the internal world. And above and beyond that is a very special place. You live there. You live your whole life there. And if you're not real clear, you may confuse that internal world with the outside world. If you confuse it, then you think the map is the territory. But we know the map is not the territory. There's a distinction. There's a difference. And that's what we're going to try to get to. So above what you're thinking, hearing, and feeling is this meta place. The meta place is your mind. It's your knowledge, it's your understanding, it's your memories, it's your imaginations, it's your expectations, it's your anticipations, it's your model of the world. It's all these things that we know are up there, but how do we picture them? So the next slide. So this slide is about other ways and names that we call it. Psychology, from the very beginning of the late 19th century, has trying to figure out what's up there and how is it structured and organized. So as you can see there, we've got lots of different ways of describing it. The matrix, or the inner game. NLP called it the model of the world. It's your map about how the world works. We could talk about it being the conscious awareness and the unconscious awareness. So lots of ways of trying to describe it. Next slide. Historically, here is some of the ways that others have described it. Sigmund Freud decided that there was three things inside here: ego, your reality principle, your id, all those drives and forces at the unconscious level that's driving you really to be a beast. And so to manage it and tame it, the superego. Doesn't really give us much of a picture. And the only picture he gave us really, well, there's two pictures. One was the iceberg, and ego is just the little tiny top of the iceberg that we have awareness of, and everything else is subterranean. That didn't give us much of a picture of the mind or what to do with it. The other one is when the steam engine came along, he decided that emotions are like the steam engine. They build up steam, and that steam has to go somewhere. And so he invented the idea of sublimation and repression and introjection and other things. It was a way that he was trying to figure it out. Not really very effective. And you can see we've got some other things. In Gestalt psychology, Fritz Perls came up with upper dog and underdog, top dog and underdog, and that really doesn't give us much of a picture of the mind, except that there's conflict. Something's up, something's down, and there's internal conflict. And Gestalt psychology, Gestalt therapy was attempting to deal with it. NLP, when NLP came along in 1975, we began to get a picture of the mind by talking about the cinema of the mind, the representational picture. So this was the amazing thing about NLP. Other psychologists had referred to the fact that there's visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners. But what NLP did was to say that these are the channels of thinking. And you can turn up the visual channel or the auditory channel, gustatory channel. And so we began to have a way to think about what's inside there. And if this is what we represent, then there's going to be other things higher, like beliefs and values and identity. So we began identifying all these things inside the mind, but without a structure, without being able to see what we're talking about, just making a list. So the next slide. So the meta place is your mind. It's your inner world. It's what you're aware of, and there's a whole list of things that are inside there. What I decided to do was to call these things, the memories, imaginations, beliefs, ideas, thoughts, words, all of that, to call each of those a landmark. A landmark. If it's a landmark, then it's a place inside of consciousness where you could go to your beliefs. What do you believe about that? You could go to your values. What do you value about that? You could go to your memories. What do you remember that is informing you? Or your expectations to the future. And so if these are landmarks, then how are they related to each other? And how many landmarks are there inside of the mind that you could begin to picture a template? So the next slide. So here's a diagram, and it's one of the diagrams we put in the book, The Meta Place. A little hard to see, I think. We've got an hourglass. So the bottom of the hourglass is our lives in the world. So we got the green grass there and a person. Stimulus response is that circular line there. Something triggers us, we respond, and that's our world. Above that are our representations, and above our representations are our beliefs. And then above that are just many, many aspects of beliefs. A value would be what you believe is important. An identity is what you believe about yourself and who you are. A memory is what you believe has happened. An anticipation is what you believe will happen or could happen. So above beliefs are many, many kinds of beliefs and facets of beliefs. It's beliefs all the way up. And so now we got a picture of the meta place. It's layers of thoughts self-reflexively upon each other. And we've separated out time-wise the things I remember that's in the background knowledge that I just take with me. It's my background knowledge of the things I've learned, and the things I've learned so well that it's just unconscious. And the future, my anticipation of what's going to happen, and all the predictive thinking, and all of the forecasting about what might happen. And so we get the time element in those two. Out to the side, we've got the ecology check. It's like, because of your self-reflexive consciousness, it's like you can step aside and you could think about the whole thing and gain perspective of all of these layers of thoughts, layers of beliefs, layers of awareness that you have built up in this meta place. And so that's a very simple beginning of the template of the meta place. Next slide. So the challenge with this extensive list of all of these meta levels, all of these places, all of these landmarks of the mind, the challenge is which one is most important? Which one is second most important? Or how do we prioritize it? Well, we know that some are more important than others. We know that beliefs are pretty important because whatever you believe, it's a command to the nervous system, and it can set up a self-fulfilling prophecy, a self-organizing dynamic. So beliefs are pretty important. Values are pretty important. Identity does the same thing. Intention does the same thing. So some of these meta levels are more dynamic, more energetic, more important than other ones. And so what we've done with a meta place is to highlight some of them as more dynamic and energetic than other ones. And so that's the middle of this diagram here, which ones really stand out and are more essential. When we did the book NeuroSemantics, 2012, I made a list of 104 meta levels. 104. So there's lots and lots of meta words describing these levels, but they're not all equally important. But when you hear these meta words, you know that people are talking about some landscape inside the mind somewhere. So
Yeah.
Next slide.
So Michael, just let's pause a little bit there. I can hear my voice in the echo. Shall I go ahead?
You fine. We're hearing you fine.
Sorry. Oh, you hear me fine. Okay. So this slide that I'm sharing now, where you've just shown us the past, the memory, the present, and the anticipation. Is that what new about this landscape of the meta place that you're bringing?
Well, these are landscape places of the mind.
Okay. So say more about how you delineated that there's a part that's looking at the past, and then that present, and then that anticipation.
Well, we're temporal creatures, and one of the concepts we have is the concept of time. It's a concept. It's a belief about the temporal existence that we have. And one of the things is that we remember what has happened. If you couldn't remember, then anything you learn today would be gone tomorrow. So we remember and we learn, and then we put it into neurology, so it's in muscle memory, so that it is deep inside of us, so that when you learn something really thorough, like the alphabet, you cannot not read. You see a word, you automatically read it. You cannot not read. It is that deep of information. Now, the reason we do it as human beings is because we do not have content instincts. So the only way we instincts have an instinctual, intuitional way of operating is that we learn deeply and we keep it with us. And we're going to call that the background knowledge. And you've got so much background knowledge that you take with you everywhere you go. It operates as a filter.
Okay.
So here again, separating this and trying to make it simple. So we got a person encountering the world, and the first thing we do in our thinking is to represent things, and then we draw a conclusion. And when you draw a conclusion about something, you have moved up the levels, and that's where the belief starts. And then it's beliefs all the way up into intentionality. What's occurring there in that funnel, that metastating funnel with the layers of thoughts and beliefs about thoughts and beliefs, is how you're mapping out different parts of the world. It's all conceptual. So this is where concepts occur, and your concepts about time, about persons, about personality, about the meaning of life, about 1,000 concepts. And so inside of that funnel is the self-reflexive consciousness of a human being. And the key thing that really stands out is these are just all forms of belief. And as a belief, these are commands to the nervous system informing us how to respond and behave. Now, the dotted line in this diagram, the dotted line represents thinking. The most essential thing of all of us is thinking. And so we think, and we have patterns of thinking. And it's the first thing that occurs in childhood. And the thinking patterns of a child, from magical thinking and to all the other kinds of silly, childish thinking, which we now call cognitive distortions. So we overgeneralize, we personalize, we awfulize, we filter. And this is how thinking starts, which is why located in our background knowledge is a lot of these distorted ways of thinking that really we have to unlearn if we're going to do more critical thinking and more clean thinking. So thinking patterns are all the way up, informing all of our beliefs, all of our memories, all of our imaginations, all of our intentions. Change the thinking, update the thinking, and everything in the meta place gets updated and gets cleaned and enhanced. Slide. So the big question now is, how are these processes related? How is a belief related to a memory? How is a memory related to anticipation or expectation or some belief about the future? How are intentions related to beliefs? So if these are the things in the meta place, how are they related? So remember, we're not talking about the brain. We're talking about the mind. Now the brain, we know landscapes in the mind and the brain. We know there's visual cortex, and we know there's a motor cortex and an auditory cortex, an associative cortex. We've mapped out the brain and all these landscapes of the brain. We also have mapped out pretty extensively relationships. How oxygen moves through, how blood moves through, how nutrients move through, how neural impulses move through neuron to neuron. So what we're now trying to do is to do that with the mind. What's in the mind? What are these landscape pieces, and how do they relate to each other? If someone knows anatomy, it's the same kind of a thing. There's heart and lungs, there's livers and kidneys. There's these things in the body. So knowing what's there is important. Knowing how they are related to each other. And what are the mechanisms that relate these pieces of anatomy to each other. So in the same way, if the mind, this consciousness that we have, has landmarks, then the question now becomes, how are the processes related? How are they connected? Because if you can understand how these are related to each other, we could work them. We could go from one to the other, we could go up, we could go down, and then we can do things with ourselves and with others, like learn, like unlearn, like integrate, like feed forward, and there happens to be numerous processes, and that's what we've been really revealing in NeuroSemantics. What are these processes? These communication processes by which consciousness or mind is developed. So the next slide. So up and away. So now we talk about the word meta and how meta is going up and it's going higher and it's about what is ever it is transcending. It is transcending and including, which is one of these basic processes for what we do. So that's the magic is your thinking, and to think is to go inside into this internal world, and then what you do with that thinking now creates the uniqueness of your consciousness. So someone is thinking that their values have been violated because someone did something and they're angry. So that's the first thought. I'm angry because you did this and it violates my values. Okay, first thought. Second thought is what? If it's a respectful thought, then it's going to be respectful anger. Even though you did this and it violated my value, you're a human being and I respect you as a person. If the second thought is disrespectful, yeah, you're a human being, but I don't care, then it's disrespectful anger. So this is the going meta process, and we do it again and again and again, and we build up more complex layers of concepts upon concepts, abstractions upon abstractions, and it's how you and I as a human being, we can get lost in the mind. We can get lost in that place. And so what we want to do is to be able to navigate these landmarks. So next slide. So this slide here, and I know it's maybe a little difficult to look at, the dotted line there identifies different kinds of thinking that's informing everything in the meta place, from meta programs, which are thinking patterns, to high quality thinking, considering, questioning, doubting, detailing, and organizing, to cognitive distortions, to cognitive biases, to cognitive fallacies. And in that line of kinds of thinking that inform everything else in the meta place, this is really one place where you have leverage of change. Because you change the kind of thinking, you update the kind of thinking, You renew the kind of thinking, everything else is going to be renewed. It's really a wonderful leverage point for change and for updating our experiences that come out of that, the inner maps. So next slide. One way to think about all of this, all of those ways of thinking, is that these are hidden thinking patterns. Hidden thinking. Most of us don't even notice how we're thinking. And if you ask someone, how are you thinking? They go, what? I know what I'm thinking. What do you mean, how I'm thinking? Well, are you thinking positively or negatively? You're thinking optimistically or pessimistically? You're thinking in detail or global? You're thinking in options or... Oh. And there's hundreds of thinking patterns. And they determine the quality of our life. And so the quality of your thinking determines the quality of your experiencing, the quality of the maps that you have to navigate life.
Okay. Michael, this might be a good time for questions. Let me try and switch off my mic because of the echo. Is it better now? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, maybe it's better this way. So there's two questions, Michael, that I think maybe we take them now. The one is, so now that you're talking about thinking patterns, when there are times where there are individuals who we say can't stop thinking, or they're thinking too much, their mind is working in overdrive, that sometimes that's confused with people going mad. So the question is, how, when that happens, what are those people doing or what's happening with those people in terms of this model that you're sharing right now?
There's two things that could be happening. One is the person is not thinking too much, they're thinking too inadequately. Because if you think inadequately, it's not going to solve anything. It's going to be inadequate. And that's usually the case. The other one is they're spinning. They're thinking, and then they're thinking about their thinking, and then they're thinking again, and then they're thinking about their thing, and they're spinning. And it's going nowhere. The thinking is not intentional and directional. It is not, there's no quality. And they're just spinning around. And sometimes it gets worse and worse and worse. It's a downward spiral. It's a vicious circle. And so in either one of those, it's not that they're thinking too much, but that their thinking is so inadequate and is uncontrolled.
Wow. Okay. And so the next question is that, so if their thinking is uncontrolled and inadequate, I suppose earlier, by the end of this, we will talk about how to help those kinds of people, correct, Michael?
Yes, of course.
Okay, all right. So the next question we have here is, what happens with senior people that have a very short memory and forget in minutes what we talked about? That's a question from Cecilia.
So I'm not quite understanding the question.
So it means, so older people who are older and they lose memory. So the question is, I think it's a question related to what I asked earlier about how you delineated, and that the fact that there's so much that we live from that's based on memory. So this question says, what happens with older people, senior people? They have a very short memory and then they forget in minutes what they talked about. What is happening there for them?
Yeah. Well, there could be many things. Short-term memory and long-term memory. Short-term is what is present in the moment, and it lasts about 10 seconds. You can learn to expand your short-term memory so that it lasts an hour or a day So short-term memory is something that every child suffers from. They don't remember very long, but they can learn to remember longer. And then short-term memory, if you want to remember something, you put it in long-term memory. It goes into the hippocampus, part of the brain, and now it's now stabilized. If you want to keep it there, you make it memorable. And there's about 16 or 20 ways that we've identified in the NSTT manual for how to make anything memorable. Make it memorable, and it's rememberable. Make it important. Make it visually distinctive. There's lots of ways of making it memorable. And the brain will remember things that we have created those memory things. So we have mnemonic devices and other things for making it memorable. Now, the other thing that may go on with any single person is that they may not be taking good, healthy care of their brain. And so drink a whole bunch of alcohol, and your brain is not going to function very well. And if you're not getting exercise, the brain uses 30% of the oxygen you breathe. So if you're not oxidizing and breathing deeply and getting some exercise and something cardiovascular, your brain is not going to be functioning at its highest levels. So taking good care of the brain is an important thing. Sleep is an important part of the brain. The brain integrates learning through sleep. If you're getting sleep deficiency, and if you're operating on 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep a day, you can pretty well kiss goodbye quality memory. So there's many, many things that goes into memory, and those are just a couple.
Wow. Okay. That's all the questions, Michael. Oh, here's another one. The question reads from Giocni. It says, I'm aware that if I am overwhelmed with plenty of thoughts, then I write them down so I can feel relaxed and release. What happens inside?
So writing is a memory tool. When you write something down, of course, that's the best memory of all. It's written down. And what happens to us humans is that if you try to keep it in the mind and you keep, I've got to remember, don't forget, it does create more stress. And when you write it down, it is a release, and it enables you to let the other things go because you've got it written down. So this explains why you can de-stress yourself by writing. You can de-stress yourself by talking it out with somebody else. You can de-stress by physically doing something that's cardiovascular.
Okay. All right. So I guess looking at time, Michael, we can go back to the presentation and complete what you have. Yeah.
Think, and the meta place appears, because it is a function of your thinking and the quality of your thinking. And so, first of all, representing something, and then taking whatever you're representing and editing it. We call that submodalities. We're editing the cinema of the mind, changing some of the cinematic features, and oftentimes this creates a much different representation. The representation sends signals to the body how to feel and behave. Re-edit it, and it's going to change how you feel and behave. So that's at the level, the first two levels there, representing and editing. The third level is draw a conclusion, and now you have gone into creating concepts and understandings and knowledge and learnings, all of these big meta-level terms and language. And as you do that, you're creating a world that you're living in. Hope it relates and it corresponds well to the outside world. If it doesn't, then this world becomes much more hallucinatory and you're living in the clouds. And it's not going to be working very well. So Alfred Korzybski said that the map is as good to the territory as it corresponds to the territory, so that then you can use it to navigate where you want to go and the experiences you want to have. So we create the world of mind. And isn't that just absolutely fascinating? You create your mind. Be careful what you believe, because you're creating the very interpretive structure by how you think. And this is where the ecology concept comes in. If you can step aside from it and run an ecology check, you can do a quality control over your mind. Is this good thinking? Is this critical thinking? Is this precise? Is this clear? What do I need to do to get this more clear? And when you can do that, then you can manage your mind instead of that mind managing you. And so growing up, we create lots of weird stuff as children through the cognitive distortions. And many of the cognitive fallacies are built into the way the brain functions. And if you have the ability to step aside and quality control it, you can manage it rather than being a victim of it. So the next slide. But there's a problem, or what could be a problem. We're not born effective thinkers. We have to learn how to think. Isn't that amazing? Now, schools should be like, we should send children to school so they learn how to think. But schools teach them what to think, not how to think. So meta-thinking, learning how to think, is something that most of us have to do after we get out of school so that we can correct some of the misunderstandings that went on during school. So learning to think efficiently, it takes years to really do that well. And some of the reasons we have to wait for the brain to develop. It's during puberty that the frontal lobes, the prefrontal lobes, are developed, and they start developing during puberty, and they continue to develop until we're mid-30s. So your brain is still developing and growing into the mid-30s. So it lets me know why I made such stupid mistakes. Use the sound here. So it takes years for the brain to develop, and we got to catch up with that. And there's about 12 major functions. We call them executive functions in the prefrontal lobes that develop, that enables us to do good decision-making, planning, self-awareness, emotional management, ability to restrain ourselves. There's about 12 of those executive functions that are so critical to living a good, healthy life. And it just takes a while for that to develop and for us to learn how to think accurately.
Okay.
So here's a list of cognitive distortions. We present this in every medical training. We present this in lots of the different trainings, the cognitive distortions, and the childish thinking on one side and the adult thinking, and moving from the kind of thinking that just creates misery to the kind of thinking that helps us to be have more well-being and health. The next one is, I think, the cognitive biases, and it's just a quick list of those. The next slide. Yeah, the cognitive biases. So it starts with the understanding bias. It's almost humorous. We think we understand. It's the most common bias that human beings have, and it's most ridiculous one. We don't understand. But we had this bias. And a few years ago, my daughter said to me, how does electricity work? And my first thought, well, that's easy. There's a hydroelectric plant somewhere, and the water turns the plant, it creates electricity, and the electricity gets inside of the wires, the electrons, and they run through here. And she said, what are these electrons? And I go, well, let me see if I can explain that. And she just kept asking questions until I realized I don't know what I'm talking about. And finally I said, electricity is what runs these buttons, and you push the lights on, you push the lights off. Most things in everyday life, we don't understand very much about them. We have this illusion that we understand. Now, the next one you're probably familiar with, well, the third one there, confirmation bias. When you believe something, you go looking for confirmation. It is such a human tendency and bias, and it gets us into so many troubles. The availability bias is that how I think and what I know is pretty much whatever is available. So what have I been watching? What have I been reading? And whatever is available, that seems to be the most compelling information, which is why most people are more scared to fly than to drive. Statistics show that you have 7 times more likelihood of being in a car accident and dying driving to the airport than flying the plane. But it doesn't seem that way. Because availability is whenever a plane crashes, it's on the news and we're all aware of it and how disastrous it is. But when someone has a car crash and someone dies, we don't think much of it. But 7 times more people die in the car accidents than in the plane accidents. So that's availability bias. And the next slide, just some more of the biases. The experiential bias, the consistency bias. The next one has some more. And the social bias, the context bias. I think the next one has experiential bias. So there's quite a few biases built into the structure of the brain. So if you're a victim of your brain, these biases are just running, and if you don't know them and don't catch them and don't do quality control, then we can do some really poor thinking. So we move up as we go into this meta place, and once again we're representing things and so on. So the next slide. So this is just picking up what we said earlier about the cinematic movie that we represent in our mind and how we edit it. So the next one. So this gives a more detail to the landscape of the meta place, what's there, and beginning to look at how these things are related to each other. We've got 2 basic communication loops. The one at the bottom there, stimulus response. Behaviorism, as a form of psychology in the early 20th century, that's what they studied, the stimulus response loop. And some people still live in that very simple stimulus response world. Stimulus response. So I'm feeling this, you made me feel this. This is happening outside, so now I have to respond this way. And you're a victim of the stimuli. But human life is so much more complex than that. And so there's a vertical loop. The vertical loop goes up step by step from the person to representations, to editing, to beliefs, and all the way up. And so that vertical loop goes up as you feed back to yourself different thoughts. So I feed back to my representations, I feed back my editing, I feed back a belief, and then I feed it forward. So it's a dynamic loop. Every time I send my thoughts upward, they come back down as signals to the body. And when I send them up to belief level, it comes back as commands to the nervous system. And so here's this loop that goes on, and this loop explains the self-organizing dynamic of thinking and believing. And how that, we've got to be so careful what we believe, because as soon as you believe it, it becomes a command to your nervous system. This explains the placebo effect. This explains the no placebo effect. That whatever you believe, so be it unto you. And it's a powerful dynamic that can make life really well, and it's a dynamic process that can really make life disastrous with that loop. As things go up, and then you learn something, the loop now goes over to the background knowledge, and once it gets in there, 95% of everything in the background knowledge is unconscious. And once it gets there and gets really solidified by repetition, it becomes a program. So then we have a line going from background knowledge straight to the person, and it's a program. You're programmed. So if you've learned English, English is probably now a program. If you learn German, German is that program. So this is where neurolinguistic programming identifies we've got a lot of programs going on. You got a program for how to get up, how to get dressed, how to take care of yourself, how to cook a breakfast, how to drive a car. You got program. You don't even have to think about it. It's a program, and it's running automatically. And if it's a good program, then it frees you up to think about other things. If it's not a good program, and you feel compelled, I just feel I have to do this. It can create compulsions, addictions, and all kinds of disastrous things. It's a program. And so now, if that's where it is, now that's what we've got to unlearn and do some deprogramming of that deep knowledge that has programmed us in. As we go up, another loop goes out to the future. And that's because the brain is a prediction machine. Your brain is always trying to predict what's going to happen. So you get up in the morning and you start thinking, what's going to happen? How should I dress? Where should I go? You're always thinking of the future. You're predicting what's going to happen. And it's a survival mechanism. And it's really a good one. And as long as you're anticipating and you got some tentativeness in there, then your forecasting can be very helpful because it's not definitive, because nobody knows the future. But once it gets definitive, once you have an expectation or a demand or a prediction that this is going to happen, one of the cognitive distortions of children is predicting the future. I will never be able to get over this. Everybody will always laugh at me. And so this is part of our temporal nature and predicting into the future. And this is where planning comes in and decision making comes in. This is where mind reading can come in as we have that loop out there. So this begins to give us a sense of how these things are tied together and how they relate to each other. Gregory Bateman gave us another dynamic for all of this, is that whatever is the higher frame always governs the lower frame. The higher frame governs it, the higher frame tempers it, the higher frame qualifies it. And so as we go up each frame, as we move up, each one is now setting the frame for whatever is below it. And this dynamic is a powerful dynamic that explains the structure that's going to be in this meta place. And how you and I can use it is that if we find a structure and each level is less and less effective and maybe even dysfunctional, all we have to do is to make one more jump upward and outframe it. Because the higher will govern the lower. And so the ability to outframe. So we reframe by changing the frame, but you can outframe by making that meta move. So that's one of the real powerful things that's inside of the meta place that enables us to really manage it and manage it well. Next slide. So inside your mind, you entertain the world. And so once we've already covered most of this. It's just moving up those levels and bringing the outside world in, processing it, working it over, giving it different meanings. Next slide. So above that, representing is editing. So next slide. Behind the scenes. So behind the scenes are the thinking patterns, and we've talked about that. And so inside there, one little comment here is that the pictures in your mind are not photographs. It's one of the misunderstandings I think people have about representing. So I see a flip chart, I see a chair, and I represent it. But it's not a photograph. It's a construct that you invent and construct, and the picture in your mind of the chair, and the picture in my mind of the chair will be quite different, because they're not photographs, they're constructs. So the next slide. Once again, we have a list here of the different things, some of the diagrams. Between the next one. This is the drawing of conclusions that leads to all the beliefs and the confirmations of the lower thoughts. And structurally, a belief is a confirmation of the previous thought, and that goes up level after level, which creates the belief systems. Next slide. So here's all the different facets of beliefs. It's beliefs all the way up. And all of these are just different kinds of beliefs. And when you know that, then each of these become a command to the nervous system, which explains why they can be so powerful, whether it's a rule that you got in your head, that's the rule, or a policy, or a permission, or a prohibition. And so we often take these things as absolutes and forget that they're beliefs. And once you know it's a belief, that frees you up from the rigidity and the dogmatism that can be in your mind. So the next one.
We have some questions, Michael. Yeah. So the first one is about the how to think. We're talking about the quality of our thinking and how to think. And the question is, for people who are under the influence of either drugs or medication, which, how is that impacting the quality of the thinking, and how could we help them with the outframing and the methodologies that you've outlined today?
So I'm not quite the thing you're saying.
Okay, can I repeat the question?
Yeah, please repeat the question.
Okay, so this is linked to the point you were making earlier about how to think and the quality of thinking. And that earlier you also mentioned that if you you do not have the quality of sleep, then you can kiss goodbye good memory. So linked to that, the question is about the people who are under the influence or who use drugs. How could we help them to get better quality of thinking, and how do we help them with this, with what we're sharing with us today?
Answer the first question because I don't quite understand the second. How do we think? That slide that we had of all the thinking patterns, we think with the meta programs, and the most essential part of thinking is considering, and then questioning, and doubting, and then detailing and organizing. That's the most. If we could only teach children how to think, or adults how to think, consider it, ask some questions, be skeptical about it, start detailing. So this is what the meta model teaches. The meta model teaches us how to effectively think, which is what we call critical thinking. Now, you said something about people being under some influence.
Yes, and that, so people who are on drugs and they're not thinking clearly, or under some kind of, I'm talking about substance abuse and how that impacts thinking.
Well, simple answer, stop it. Just stop, because it's messing up the brain. And you're not going to think well under drugs. And so just stop that. Take good care of the brain.
Okay.
And that's get good exercise, eat good food, oxidize your brain, get good sleep, and quit taking the drugs.
Okay. All right. So the second question is, that's from Sheila. Could you say more about the difference between photographs and constructs?
Well, the brain cannot create photographs. Your eyes do not process the world as it is, but through the filters that we have. There is no color outside. In the electromagnetic field and the part that has vision, there's no color. Color is a function of the rods and cones in your eyes. You add color. There's no color out there. And if we look at the eyes of some animals, whether it's the animals that can see infrared, part of the electromagnetic spectrum, they can see the infrared. Our eyes can't see that. Or some of the animals that have 360 vision. Well, our eyes don't do that. So our eyes lets us see, and whatever you see is a construct. And it's not what is actually out there. This map is not the territory. And that's the foundation of everything in NLP and neurosemantics.
Okay. So there's also another question. I don't quite understand it, but I just think the person has written, I think they want to know, it's Louis, they want to know how the difference between, no, but it's not a question. Meta programs, thinking patterns, and filters, and then question mark. So could you say more about the link between all of them? They're all filters, but anyway.
Something about a link between the meta programs and.
Okay, so Louis is asking, are meta programs, can they also be called meta patterns? Did you hear that, Michael? Are meta programs, can they also be called meta patterns?
Yeah, if you want to call it that, I suppose. I would recommend call it what the tradition has built up to call it, the meta programs. These are programs for how to think.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Michael. That's all the questions. So I guess we can go ahead so you can conclude your presentation for today.
We're just about done. Let's see the next slide. Some of these may be redundant. Yeah, the next one. So let's go to the next one, because I think the next one is going to well, the reflexivity. So this is the dynamic that's going on inside and explains the processes of how the different landmarks in the mind are related to each other, the reflexivity. Understanding reflexivity is critical to understanding the differences between the levels. And if you don't understand that and you confuse the levels, it just creates a big confusion once we separate the levels. And this is what Korzybski meant when he said, you've got to ask the question, at what level? So if you're talking about love, at what level? Is it this love, primary state? Is it loving love? That's a whole different thing. Loving love is infatuation. I love to be in love. Could you love infatuation? Could you love of love? And so this is where some words are multi-ordinal. You can use them at every single level and they mean something different. And so separating this out, and Korzybski said that his work was creating a theory of self-reflexivity which answers the question, how is the map different from the territory? So the next one. And so by means of self-reflexivity, you do so many things, and here's a whole list of things that happens. You're layering thoughts and feelings, and every time you layer it, it makes it more complex. Every time you move to a higher level, you've created a frame, and you've set a frame. And when you do that, you're creating a classification or a category. And every time you do that, this becomes your reference system, what you're referring to, and the meanings that you're creating. And it's now how you are responding to your responses. And so reflexivity is such a powerful dynamic there. And once you understand it, then you can help people use it effectively rather than ineffectively. Next one. Let's go to the next one. We've got several in here that we can just skip right over. Next one. So let's go to the next one. We'll skip a few of these. The spiraling of reflexive consciousness, we've spoken about that. And the layering, we've spoken about that. And obviously, every time you're going meta or you're meta stating, you're setting a frame. So the next one. And of course, when you do that, all of these frames, this matrix of frames, creates the meta place. So next one. And the diamond of consciousness, you know that from the APG, how that these are different facets of the same thing. And trying to have an understanding of how there's so much reduplication inside. So the next one. And the next one. So this is the key one. If there's anything that is really, really central, it's this, that as you, with your thinking, move up and you set a new thought about a thought or learning about a learning or a memory about a memory, as you go up, the frame can be the problem. The person is never the problem. But the frame is always, if there's a problem, is always the problem. And so structurally, whatever you construct there, that can be a real problem that now creates a lot of conflict inside or dysfunction inside. And to emphasize, it's not the person. The person's doing that thinking, but it's that thinking and that framing that is the problem. And once we separate person from thinking, then we can go look at that thinking and see how useful it is or unuseful, how correct it is or incorrect, and now we can start working on it. Without this concept that the person is never the problem and the frame is always the problem, without this, people confuse themselves with their framing. They confuse themselves with their thinking. I thought it, therefore I must be wrong. And that is probably the ultimate essential mistake that we humans make. It's just thinking, and you're more than that thought. And if I thought that same thoughts that you're thinking, I'd have the same experiences you're having. And so knowing that, this becomes a leverage point for change and enables people to look inside, see what's in the meta place, and now begin to make changes because they're not the problem. The frame is the problem. So next one. And the next one, let's just skip through, see what we have toward the end. Moving on. And so this is the meta place. And now we got the landscape pieces, and we have begun to identify how they're related to each other. Once you know that, now you can start moving between the landscape pieces and using the feedback, feed forward loop as it's moving around there. And all you have to do is just ask a question. What do you think or feel or believe about? And the person will take you to the next place in that structure, in the meta place. So let me stop there. Yeah, I think everything else is just going to be what we've already talked about. Yeah.
All of
So
it?
as you can see, there's lots of things to say about it, and we're not going to cover all of these.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Michael. I do not see any more questions over here on me. I was quite fascinated by what you said about the value of outframing as a key tool for us to work with the negative or unhelpful thinking. Could you say more about that? Just more examples of how that works.
Outframing is whenever you step outside of a system and then bring some thought, concept, belief to the system that's going to outframe whatever's going on. We do this in mind lines, and we've got probably, I think, something like 20 outframes. So here's an outframe. Someone identifies this thought and this thought and this thought and these beliefs, and there's a whole belief system, and the whole thing is quite dysfunctional and creates all kinds of dysfunctions in a person's life. And then you just say, about all of this, where'd you learn this? Where'd you learn this? That presupposes it's a learning. That presupposes you learned it at a certain time, certain place, from a certain person. And so where'd you learn it? Oh, I learned it at this place or this time. And it begins to free us up. It's just a set of learnings. It's just a set of frames. The ecology check is an out frame. So we look at all of that and we go above it. Does this enhance your life? Does this make you, empower you as a person? Is this your highest spiritual path? Would you want this for your children? Now you outframe it with ecology. It's not very ecological. It's not very healthy. And so you've outframed it. And so having a number of outframes enables you to now work the whole system from one movement in the meta place above it that now recognizes this is your constructs. And if you constructed it, you can deconstruct it.
Well, thank you, Michael. There's no other questions on the chat currently. So I want to say thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, Michael, for always bringing this new knowledge for us and for your generosity of spirit. At the moment, before we say a final goodbye to each other, we're going to do a photo. Mazuki, correct? Yeah. So put on your best smile. Mazuki, I'll let you handle that one. Your video on, your best smile, so that Mazuki can take a picture of all of us before we say goodbye.
So are you ready? You've got your makeup on, right? Ready? 3, 2, 1. That's the first page. And the next page. Yes, are you ready? 3, 2, 1. That's right. So I have only 2 pages of people who turn on their video. So we are done with that.
Yeah, I'm still on. My mic is on, right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, yeah. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This was our time to be with our elders and learn. So next time, be here next in 2 weeks when we will now go into implementation phase. How do we implement this and we use it for our coaching and training? Okay. See you then. Are there any announcements that are maybe missing, Mazuki? Any announcements that you are aware of that are maybe missing?
Probably the announcement that I would like to remind is in May, we have the NSTT from the 13th to the 27th of May. That will be in Cancun in Mexico. So an opportunity for you to go to Mexico and be certified as a NeuroSemantics trainer again. So that's the announcement.
Yeah, and I might add there that we have ACMC in Cape Town. So Cape Town, South Africa. Yeah, so if you've always wanted to see, to be with South Africans and Mauritians, it's a collaboration between Mauritius and South Africa. And it's going to be in Cape Town, Robben Island, etc., etc. So come join us. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Lovely.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you.